In our Spotlight tonight, the next episode in our What's Wrong with John McCain series. Surely a war veteran who spent 5.5 years as a POW in Vietnam would want to do anything he could to help those coming home from the battlefields of Afghanistan and Iraq. But as the Pentagon tries to deal with an epidemic of suicides among the troops, the numbers nearly doubling over the last 5 years, one congressman says his efforts to help those who went to war and now cope with the mental scars has been blocked by John McCain. It would mean $10 million, a tiny figure by Washington standards, a tiny number in defense spending, to start an outreach program for those coming home from active duty to do something called Individual Ready Reserve, or IRR, essentially keeping them on call to return from civilian life to combat if needed. That's what Army Sergeant Coleman Bean did, serving twice in Iraq. But his family says when he came home to New Jersey, he couldn't get the help he needed for dealing with PTSD, and in 2008, he took his own life. That tragedy moved Democratic Representative Rush Holt to create the provision which was ultimately cut from the defense spending bill passed today in the House. Joining me now, Congressman Rush Holt of New Jersey. Congressman, could you just, before we get to John McCain's role in this, explain this $10 million provision, why it was needed in addition to the other mental health resources that are already available to veterans?
Well, Lawrence, you explained the background well. When Coleman Bean, Sergeant Bean, killed himself, I talked to his family and pledged to do what I could to see that this sort of thing would never happen again. To their credit, they conducted really studies around the country, and it was apparent to us that we need outreach. It's not enough to let these veterans or the reservists self-diagnose, and if they imagine they have a problem, go see somebody. It's really important to get them where they are. And so this provision that the House has passed twice now, the House of Representatives, would provide for trained counselors to reach out to these reservists at least every 90 days, probably by phone or in person, to see how they're adjusting to civilian life. It's I think, a fairly straightforward, common sense approach. And as I say, it passed the House twice. It disappeared in the House-Senate conference. And last year, it was because of objections by unnamed senators for unspecified reasons. Well, the same thing happened this time, except that I began to suspect that Senator McCain had something to do with it. So I spoke with him. And indeed, he said, well, this is an overreach. In order to this proactive approach is really unnecessary. And, you know, you have said, and people are now very much aware that the rate of suicides among in the military is greater than in the general population. It is growing. You know, it's 10% higher among the military than the general population, and among Marines, it's 20% higher. Clearly, there's a need for outreach here. And, you know, when I said this to Senator McCain, he just essentially got mad and said, don't lecture to me about military suicides. And I said, I wasn't lecturing. I'm just explaining the need and why we need to do something to reach out. Anyway, now I know why this disappeared from the Defense Authorization Bill. Earlier in the program, you were talking about all the legislation that's been done since the election. A lot of good things. The Defense Authorization Bill has some good features and some bad features, actually. But this should have been in there. Now, was it, you know, Senator McCain, by the way, getting mad when confronted on legislative activity is a very common experience for senators who've dealt with him before, as they can all report. But when he talks about don't give me a lecture,
It sounds to me like he needs a lecture on these suicide figures. Did you have the sense that he was getting new information when you were telling him what was happening, what the horrifying new statistical picture of military suicide looks like?
I don't know how much he knows about the situation. I presume he does, because everyone hears about this, and anyone who either goes to hearings of the Armed Services Committee or interacts with military brass or the Veterans Administration surely knows about the effort that the DOD is undertaking, that the VA is undertaking. This legislation, I think, is important, this provision that I inserted in the bill, because it deals with the reservists who often fall between the cracks. They're not looked after by the VA. They're not in a regular military unit. They're often on their own between deployments. And so I think there's a particular need for these reservists. It's hard to get the statistics on suicide rates among these, in any of these categories. It's hard to get the statistics. But it appears that there is a real need here. Senator McCain, said at one point, well, maybe you need this in New Jersey, but we don't need it in Arizona. Well, I beg to differ. I think we need it in all 50 states and the territories, wherever people are serving.
Just absolutely shocking. Maybe you need this in New Jersey. We don't need it in Arizona. Congressman Rush Holt, Democrat of New Jersey, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Well, I'll keep working on it. We need it. Thank you.